And welcome to Hartland Township and the Planning Commission meeting of September 10th. We'd like to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Keith, would you take roll, please?
Sure, certainly. Larry Fox.
Here.
Jeff Newsom. Here. I'm here. Joe Claney. Here. Sue Grissom.
Here.
Mike Mitchell.
Here.
Tom Murphy.
Here.
All present.
All right, thank you. Next up, item 4, approval of our meeting agenda.
So moved. Support.
We have a motion from Commissioner Newsom, a second from Commissioner Mitchell. Are there any changes? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next up, approval of our August 27th meeting minutes.
So moved. Support.
We have a motion from Commissioner Newsom, a second from Commissioner Murphy. Are there any changes? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next up, item 6, call to the public. Anyone this evening? Come on up. Get your name and address. We'll be glad to hear what you have to say.
Okay, great. Good evening. My name is Dale McKim. I live in Heritage Meadows at 11085 Matthew Lane. And in my recent communication with the Division of Environmental Health in Lansing, I remain concerned with the health risk to the residents of Heritage Meadows if the Mug and Bob's gas station is allowed. Therefore, before this Planning Commission decides on granting the special use for a gas station at M59 and Clark Road, please review the newly revised 2015 EPA leak detection requirements on underground storage gasoline tanks and piping connected to those tanks. Specifically, I request you look at the federal regulation requiring at least one of their listed leak detection methods. Since this proposed gas station will be so close to Heritage Meadows, along with the sharing of wetlands, I urge this Planning Commission to require Mug and Bob's to use vapor monitoring, including tracer compound analysis, and groundwater monitoring as at least 2 of their methods to meet the new federal EPA leak detection requirements. Also, I request that this panel inquire on how the neighbors of Heritage Meadows and/or the Hartland Township can access any monthly monitoring reports. There might be some other things in this new regulation that haven't taken effect yet for Michigan, but we as a group might want to see if Mug and Bob's would put them into this installation as well. So I ask this Planning Commission to review these new EPA regulations in detail prior to making any decisions. We owe it to the residents of Heritage Meadows. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Good evening.
Hello, my name's Greg Pollock. I live at 11187 Matthew Lane. And my concern also is the Mug and Bob's gas station that's proposed to go up on the corner of M59 and Clark Road. I know this is the Planning Commission, and a special permit is going to have to be granted for at least this 24/7 drive-through service. Right now, Hartland, as you all know, has that Speedway gas station. From what I understand, that Speedway is going to be that Speedway should be developing soon to become one of the just like Bell Tire has their Platinum store, this Speedway will also be growing. So that's fantastic. It's in a good area. I understand Myers also is going to have that opportunity to put in a gas station. But what has happened with the gas stations that have gotten abandoned? For example, the Mobile. I moved here in 2005, and that Mobile gas station, the Mobile was removed, and unfortunately, there's nothing left but that piece of cement, where occasionally you'll see someone selling a carpet or something of that sort. And recently, the BP, or pardon me, the Shell, which is turning to a BP, but the sign still really hasn't reflected that. They've lost a tenant. It's a vacant store. that's kind of going downhill. So we've got some gas station options. We see what happens when a gas station fails. Mug and Bob's had the opportunity to come out a few weeks ago and explain and listen to our concerns, and that was absolutely positively fantastic. At least we had dialogue. But you've heard it from the residents of Heritage Meadows over and over and over again, and we do have concerns. Those concerns are the traffic. I know MDOT has come out and done their study, but traffic will increase. We have concerns as it pertains to the safety and well-being of the residents. We're concerned of crime. We're also concerned of the health risks that have been mentioned. And with Mug and Bob's coming out, at least there's that opportunity for dialogue, and we'd like to, at least I have a list on behalf of Heritage Meadows that I'd like to present, and maybe what we can do is get Mug and Bob's as well as the Planning Commission to sit down with Heritage Meadows and go over this list and see what could be done and what couldn't be done. You had made a concern. You mentioned your concern about the health risk. I happen to work for the Department of Treasury, and a good friend of mine, his dad worked and was part owner of Webb Oil. Webb Oil did a lot of development in the middle of the state, as well as all over the state. Well, Eric Marble, he graduated from Western Michigan. He got a degree in petroleum engineering, and he put in gas stations. He died 5 years ago from leukemia, and at least my buddy tells me, he was concerned, and he believes benzene was a cause of that. So, yeah, we're expressing these concerns. This is something that's going in our backyard, and I do think it should be reviewed. And I'd like to at least go over some of Heritage Meadows' concerns if we can.
Well, we do have a time limit,
and
so
I'm almost done. And
are these the same concerns that we previously heard at numerous meetings?
These are proposals in regards to. They may get a special permit. They may not.
Can I offer you? I'd like to. There have been no resubmittals. There's been no meetings. They met with you. They heard what you had to say. I think it would honestly be best if you let them listen to what you had to say, which you did, and see how they react.
Right. Well, and we also
we do have a meeting tonight, an item on the agenda, and we do have a 3-minute time limit. And I appreciate your concerns, but if they are the same concerns that we've been hearing, I would ask that you allow the applicant to go forward on the agenda, and then afterwards, if you would like to stay, take another 3 minutes and give us what you have.
Well, I don't want to go over the concerns now. What was brought to our attention was come to the table with a list, and that list could possibly be agreed upon, or there could be items taken away. Yeah, we can. No, we can't. And I at least have that list ready to go. And then after that, I can propose the list.
Well, if I can offer something, if you want to, if the list is something you have in front of you, I'm happy to take it and forward it on to the developers team, and at least start there.
David, I can email that to you.
Okay.
I happen to have. We've had the opportunity to communicate back and forth. I'll send that list to you on behalf of Heritage Meadows, and that's a start, because this very well could happen, and if it does happen, we'd like to see at least some compromise in regards to what could possibly be done. So, all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Dave.
All righty. Yep. Anyone else?
Can I give you this? And it has the title of that new EPA regulation that just came out in July of 2015.
Sure.
Thanks.
All right. Anyone else this evening? Seeing none, we'll close to the call to the public. We have no public hearing this evening, so we'll move to item 8A, which is site plan number 524F, which stands for final. This is the Fiddler Grove Chestnut Development, and I will now turn it over to our planning director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. As you mentioned, the item before the Planning Commission tonight is the final plan development site plan for Fiddler Grove. Fiddler Grove is proposed to be 25 detached condominium units on what is currently a vacant 9-acre parcel on the south side of M59, just east of Cullen Road. This is a proposal that this Planning Commission and our Township Board have seen several times over the last year plus, and that is partly because a plan development does require going through a 3-stage review and approval process. The application has to go through a conceptual review, a preliminary review, and a final review, and all 3 of those review stages have to come before both this Planning Commission and the Township Board. So a grand total of a minimum of 6 meetings. So this is potentially step 5 of a 6-step process. Ultimately, the Township Board has the authority to grant final PD approval for a plan development such as this. I don't want anyone in the audience or our vast audience watching at home to think that we're rushing through this at this point. This is a proposal that this Planning Commission has vetted very thoroughly, both this Planning Commission and the staff and all our consultants. We've all spent a lot of time working on this plan, and obviously the applicant and his engineer who's here this evening have spent a lot of time working on it on their end and addressing a lot of the comments and the discussion points that they've heard through this process. The point where we are in this process is effectively we've gotten almost past the point of the site's layout and the building setbacks and the road design and the road length and the densities. We've had many discussions about all those things, and by getting through the preliminary review process, the applicant has addressed most of those discussion points from both the Planning Commission and the Township Board. And because this is a plan development, one of the requirements of a plan development is a development agreement. This is an agreement between the applicant and the township, effectively a contract, saying this is what we shall build. And it is at this point in the review process, the final plan development review stage, that documentation gets reviewed by the Planning Department, by our Township Attorney, and by this Planning Commission and the Township Board to ensure that everything that has been discussed over the last year is memorialized in the development agreement, and because this is a condominium, is memorialized in the condominium's master deed and bylaws. So, as I mentioned, the Planning Department has some comments regarding the development agreement, and to a lesser extent the master deed and bylaws. The Township Attorney has provided his red line comments. A lot of those are duplicative, that the Township Attorney caught a lot of the same things that the Planning Department caught. One of the primary roles of the Planning Commission this evening is to discuss any of those items, any of those recommendations within the development agreement to ensure that the Planning Commission understands and agrees with some of those recommendations. And there are some outstanding issues still remaining on the site plan that I would be hoping to get a determination from the Planning Commission on this evening. Off the top of my head, I know we wanted some determination on the sidewalk placement, the landscape screening along the south side of the property line. And one of the things that I would be recommending looking for from staff is an exhibit within the development agreement that shows the design of the units that the applicant is proposing to build. We've seen some renderings along the way. I would like to see those renderings, again, memorialized in the development agreement so that we know that the condominiums that are going to get built on this site, if it is to be approved, are consistent with those renderings that we saw through this process. So I am looking for some determinations from the Planning Commission on a few of those items. But if the Planning Commission is so inclined, the recommendation of staff is, once we make some of those determinations, the recommendation of staff is for the Planning Commission to forward this final PD site plan on to the Township Board with a recommendation of approval, subject to some fairly standard conditional items from the Planning Department, from the Township Engineer, the Township Attorney, Fire Marshal, and so on. What you have in your packets is a review letter from the Planning Department dated September 3rd, where we address a lot of things that we're hoping the Planning Commission can cover tonight. Obviously, the applicant's engineer is here to discuss those with us, and I can either at this point dive into some of those issues within my letter in particular, or I can take a pause and let the Planning Commission decide if they want to give the applicant a chance to go through the changes they have made since the last time this application was before the Planning Commission.
Dave, since your letter's pretty specific and highlights what we need to cover, if the applicant's okay with it, why don't we I'll just lead us through the few points of discussion this evening and see where we end up. If you take a look at the Planning Director's letter, packet page 14, we need to discuss this sidewalk issue. I guess we could have a brief review of that. Dave, what are we talking about?
So as the Planning Commission will recall, there was discussion through the process of should this development have a sidewalk along the private road that they're proposing? Again, for the sake of those who haven't looked at this plan as much as we all have, the applicant is proposing a single point of access cul-de-sac that goes about 700 feet into the property. I'm trying to scroll ahead to the site plan so we can pull it up. So a lot of the discussion was, should that cul-de-sac, that private cul-de-sac, have a sidewalk? And if so, should it be on both sides of the road or only one side of the road? Should it have a trailway in lieu of a sidewalk? And what the Planning Commission directed the applicant to do was provide a sidewalk on the east side of the cul-de-sac. So that is what the applicant has done. But what the comment of the township engineer was, and I think it's worthy of discussion from the Planning Commission, is that sidewalk is shown right up against the curb of the proposed road. And the question is, should there be a separation, what is typically a 5-foot separation between the back of the curb and the sidewalk? It's typically done for safety. And, this being a private road and a cul-de-sac, we could have a discussion of whether it's really a safety issue when you're talking about this type of road and this type of traffic. I believe when I spoke to Mr. Leclerc about this issue particularly, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he said that the reason they wanted to keep the sidewalk right up against the curb was so that if folks do park in their driveways in front of their garages, they would not then be blocking the sidewalk, which is something that would be more likely to happen the further they pull the sidewalk away from the road. So, but then part of what I thought might be a counterpoint to that was, if you do have it right up against the back of a mountable curb, then there's a temptation of folks who are parking on the road to kind of pull up onto that sidewalk, have their driver's side wheels on the road, have their passenger side wheels up on the sidewalk, which would also obstruct the sidewalk. So long story short, I'm hoping that the Planning Commission can have a discussion on whether we would want to agree with the engineer's recommendations to pull the sidewalk back 5 feet from the back of the curb, or if the placement of the sidewalk, as shown on the site plan, is desirable.
Okay. Mr. Leclerc, any?
Yes, I would like to comment on that. And I've done this several different ways in different developments in different communities. These units are 30 feet from the back curb, so a 4-foot sidewalk would be basically 26 feet. That's why we suggested the sidewalk be out back behind the curb. One suggestion that I may have to offer, generally on streets that are 28 feet back-to-back, which this road is, your fire marshal did not request it, but several others would request that it be signed on one side for no parking, which is probably not a bad idea for a 28-foot wide back-to-back road. And what I may suggest is that if the Planning Commission would be okay with that, that we do that on the side where the sidewalk is, to discourage parking on that side of the road, but still leave as much room as we possibly can between the unit and the sidewalk. I think maybe that would be a good alternative for you to consider. Otherwise, I think you would have the likelihood of cars pulling up in the driveway and maybe hanging over that sidewalk from the other direction.
Okay, any comments from the Planning Commission?
I just have a comment on the width of the sidewalk. I looked in our ordinance, and it calls for a 5-foot sidewalk,
Right.
so I thought we should talk about that.
That was part of the discussion, too. I failed to bring that up.
Okay. Tom?
Yeah, specifically in regards to your comment about parking on one side of the street, there might be some times of the year that maybe you could do that, but with the small lot sizes, it might be hard, or probably not just during a holiday or a gathering time, that there's enough space to park on one side of the street. It might be rather difficult.
Again, that's been my experience with roads of this nature and this width, that that parking would only be allowed on one side of the street. Certainly, if you want to move the sidewalk back a little bit, I think Mr. Grona would be happy to to appease you on that.
Personally, I think the grass strip between the road and the sidewalk looks better. I do think that people will park on it just by accident. My 2 cents.
I'm okay with it right how it's designed. I think it's multi-purpose that way. So it's large enough people can, if somebody is parked a little bit on there to make more room in the street, I think people would be able to get by more than they would if the back of the car was hanging out across it. So I'm fine with it the way it is, but I'm okay if you want to move it too. So.
If I can, what is a maintenance plan for removing snow when you have a circumstance like this?
Well, this is a detached condominium project, so the association we'll be taking care of the snow removal, as well as all the exterior maintenance on the development.
Is there an anticipation that as the snow plow is plowing the street, it would probably just plow over the gutter and up onto this 4-foot walkway?
Generally, they do that separately, just because of the weight of a plow vehicle is not really made to handle that on the sidewalk. So, typically there's a smaller, Bobcat type machine that is used for sidewalks and driveways. On this particular development, they're going to be plowing driveways also.
So that might be why, and I want to share with you that before this meeting tonight, I went through the 3 local condo complexes in our area, and I took note of that 2 of the 3 do have the same type of sidewalk, no space between, no green belt. And it appears to me to see how the top of the gutter, where it comes into the sidewalk, has been, it's damaged, but it's also got rust and scrape marks, I think, from a snow plow. And so in one of them specifically, Woodcliff North or Village, there's a project going on right now that they're replacing a lot of the sidewalks and the gutters themselves. And I'm wondering if maybe because of exactly your point that maybe there are some that do use bobcats. I've never quite seen anyone use a bobcat to remove snow in a small neighborhood like this. Is that maybe in that circumstance, that's exactly what happens, is that the snowplow does end up putting 2 wheels up on that gutter and that curb, and maybe that's why there's the circumstance going on here. That's a guess. I'm just thinking.
Sure.
But to Larry's point, I like the idea of the green belt of grass for the safety reasons from the engineer. If I'm, a couple reasons for safety might be is if someone's walking on the sidewalk, now there's a car that close to them, traveling at this rate of speed with no 5-foot buffers.
Sure.
But also if there's a car parked there and there's someone walking and the door opens, it opens right into the traffic path of someone walking. So I'm really not sure why they have that, the requirement is there, but maybe it's for all of these things.
I think part of the problem that, Tom, you're seeing is that because it's a mountable curb, and it's pretty hard to control a snowplow coming through there. I mean, they have no delineation where the curb ends and where it starts. So I'm sure even if there was a row of grass there, they're still going to be tearing the grass up because they're not going to have a definition of where the curb actually is. One compromise might be, let's go with a 5-foot sidewalk, which would be compliant. Leave it at the road, at the gutter there, at the curb, and that would allow for an extra foot of, if someone did park up on that sidewalk, they'd still have probably 3.5, 4 foot of sidewalk to walk around the car. That's just one thought.
Okay.
I asked Dave to bring up Woodcliff so we can kind of get a look at that, because my experience is no with
Right to the curb.
Yeah. Well, no, to
With grass?
grass.
Oh.
I agree with you, Chairman Fox, that I think grass does give a better look. And I am more concerned. I'm also concerned that in the winter that all the snow is just going to get piled up on the sidewalk.
Well, they have to clear the sidewalks too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
That would hope.
the association. That's what.
I guess my question on this is I just want clarification. You're suggesting that there won't be parking on one side of where the sidewalk would be, correct?
That was just a suggestion.
Would be a suggestion.
Yeah.
I like that, but people who live on the portion that you can't park on.
Well, we increase the density per their request on this development, and I think somebody brings up a good point about enough parking. These driveways are short. They have very little setbacks, so you're not going to get more than 2 cars in most of the driveways. And then you're only allowing parking on one side of the road for 25 condos.
Scott, I've been to a condo over in D19, and some of those attached condos, they're saying that some of them have very short driveways. Their garages are very much like a typical 2-car garage you have in Mill Point, where it's tough to get 2 cars in. I've done it.
Mm-hmm.
I live there, but it's hard to get 2 cars. In fact, I think even Mill Point has, you're not even supposed to be parking on the street there, but nobody enforces that.
Anyone else?
Didn't we determine at a previous site review that with each condo you could park 4 vehicles in the driveway?
Really depends on what kind of car that you're talking about. Most cars are 16 feet, give or take a foot. I mean, you do have some that are longer, suburban type vehicles. On this particular project, the front of the unit is 30 feet from the back of curb. If you look, most of the units have porches out front, so the garage is set back a little bit. So there's a really good chance that you could fit, 4 cars, 2 on each side, unless they're, the longer type vehicles, long trucks. So really, we have 36 feet, to back curb to the face of the garage.
Keep in mind, this isn't going to be a through street either. This is a cul-de-sac, it's a
Right.
private street, and if the fire marshal doesn't have a real big problem with it, I don't know why we should.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of the one-sided street parking. I don't think we should go there on that. He didn't ask for it. I don't think we should.
I don't think it should be a requirement if they want to do that. It's up to them, right?
Well, I think that on that note, if we saw how wide the driveway was and then considered the approach, how much area out front of the condos are there in total? So how many cars could you really fit out? It looks like, I don't know, real size, we'd have to figure that out if there's even room to accommodate those vehicles on one side of the road. Another point why I can is, Dave, you went in and looked at a development, I think it was Woodcliff. If you looked at Fox Ridge, that's just across the freeway behind Target. So in this example here, there's sidewalks on both sides with the buffer of grass between.
And that's the question. Does the planning commission see value in having that 5-foot buffer of grass, or?
Well, the houses are so close together, the driveways are so close together, how long of a strip of grass are you really going to have there? I'm not sure. It's really, they're going to look like all concrete.
Well, there's an additional viewpoint is that when you drive down the street, now you have that 4-foot or 5-foot area of landscaping, so that's where the trees are. So when you have this situation, you have the flat road, you have the grass with trees and the sidewalk. When you have the flat road and a sidewalk and then the opportunity, so your trees are pushed farther back. It is very noticeable, as it was to me when I took my drive through this evening.
Well, what you have is the 28 feet of asphalt, the 4 foot of curb, and 8 feet of concrete. So now what you have is something that probably looks like about a 3-lane road, if you don't break it. You're talking 32, you're talking 28 and 4 at 32 and 8. You're talking 40, and if you put a 5, or no, you're only on one side. You're only on one side. So you're talking 28, 4, and 4 or 5. So you're talking 36 feet.
Well, I'm just going to put my 2 cents in. Also, I do believe in putting that grass strip between the curb and the sidewalk for safety reasons, for the ability to put the trees in to kind of bring down the scale of the road. That's kind of a twofold purpose. So if we're going to talk about it, that's what I prefer. I think it really comes a long way.
Okay. Mike?
What kind of tree could I plant in that strip that wouldn't have a root system that is the sidewalk?
So if you do those honey locust trees, they have a problem later with their roots. But the pear trees are trees that typically handle really tight areas and don't have the problem with the roots typically.
Well, our landscape plan is done.
I know, it's done. It doesn't even have street trees really addressed on here. That could be something later to talk about.
Today's done.
Yeah. No, I know. But I mean later if they decide. But again, from safety and just breaking down the scale, I do see there's value in it. It is a different world when you have that.
Okay. Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
my 2 cents worth, I can go either way. In fact, we mentioned the sidewalk originally next to the curb. I think it looks fine, especially it's on one side. But if the desire is to put a green belt in between those two, that's fine with me. I don't really have a concrete opinion one way or the other.
Okay, so we have 2 choices here. We have, well, let's nail one down. But the people that like it against the curb, you want a 5-foot sidewalk? Keith suggested that, or a 4? We're going to come down to a show of hands.
I'm okay.
5? Okay, so we have, you get your choice here. You're either going to get a curb with a 5-foot sidewalk attached to it, or you're going to get a curb, your 5 foot of green space, and a 5-foot sidewalk, or a 4?
So the ordinance says 5 foot, we need to talk about that. Walking together, okay, if you're side by side, it's tough on a 4-foot width. You can do it. There's an ordinance that says that. I'm just,
Yes.
so now we have to decide which way to go.
This is a private road,
Yeah.
a short distance.
It is.
With
Not a-
25 homes.
right.
Okay, so does the ordinance call for a 5-foot sidewalk?
It does, but it also says it's the planning commission's determination whether or not
We have discretion.
Who put
you
that
have
in?
discretion.
Okay,
It's a short road.
so do you want a 5 or a 4? Because we're going to,
Yeah.
are you proposing a 5 or a 4-foot sidewalk?
If I'm walking with you down the street, I prefer a 5-foot
All
width.
right, okay.
You know, if I'm
5 or a
walking
4?
single file, but it's hard. It's
All
hard
right,
to do.
Joe, do you have an opinion? I'm just trying to get to a conclusion tonight.
I would prefer to, it's going to look a lot like cement everywhere.
Okay, so here's the vote. Here's, you're going to show of hands. You get a curb with a 5-foot concrete sidewalk connected to the curb, or you can have a curb, a 5-foot piece of grass, and a 5-foot piece of cement for a sidewalk. Those that would like to see the curb attached to the sidewalk as drawn on the plan, just show your hands. 3. Those that would like to have a 5-foot piece of grass with a 5-foot piece of cement breaking the curb in the sidewalk, show of hands. And here we go. Okay, 4 to 3. So curb, grass, sidewalk. All right?
Is that okay?
Okay.
That's not what I want to do.
Okay, that's fine.
Give you the reason.
Well, that's fine. We just decided you can go ahead and give us the reason. I think your representative did, but.
With that 5-foot strip of grass between the edge of curb and the walk, typically that's where a lot of the snow is going to go. And the snow has salt in it. And it is a struggle to keep the trees living and the grass living in that strip between. That's why you see so many neighborhoods where the sidewalk is right at the curb, because you don't have a negative impact on the landscaping and soil. So it presents an ongoing maintenance problem for us, having trees that'll die, grass that'll die from salt, and this little strip to maintain irrigation, grass repairs. We'd be happy to bring grass repairs, but they stay alive longer if they're a little further away from the salt. So definitely our preference to keep it the way it was. That's the reason we designed it that way, because people will be paying association dues, they'll be replacing trees, they'll be replacing sod. And
So I'm just trying to understand what you're saying. Can I ask a question?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
You're saying that if you put it that way, that's where the snow would go when you plow the subdivision?
well, inevitably when they plow, it's an angle plow, and then you can push the snow up onto the front of the lots. They'll of course plow the sidewalk as well, but the impact is going to be greater having the trees in that close. So, we'll do it the way you want. I'm just trying to explain why we did it the way we did.
Yeah, I understand that. I appreciate that. My comment would be you go through a lot of neighborhoods, including the one that my previous neighborhood. Well, you think about it, every road has grass attached to it. and I don't know that you go around and replace the lawn every year. Some years I would agree if it got real heavy or extreme conditions, but for the most part, I think that's a natural occurring event. Whether the snow is going onto the grass or the sidewalk, I don't know if it'll make a difference or not.
Larry, if I can, as I just drove through Fox Ridge, as I mentioned, here's a picture of the trees. I don't know what the trees are, but the grass that's adjacent to between the curb and the walkway, it looks like it's in the same exact condition as the grass that's up above that. So if you have that experience, you must have the experience, but this looked like a completely healthy neighborhood. And again, this is just right across the street.
We have an irrigation landscape contractor, so we're salting.
Yeah, could be.
That does happen, I will say that.
We could always heat the streets.
Okay.
That's fine.
All right, well, that was where we went with that one. The next item up is on page 16, and that would be the design details. Any problem putting the exterior elevations in the development agreement as requested?
There's many variations to make every house look different. How many?
Dave, what are you looking for?
Something of a baseline. I mean, I understand that there's going to be some variation, but if we could come up with a baseline of square footage and certain percentages, minimums, maximums of building materials, perhaps, a baseline as far as shingle materials, not necessarily saying this unit shall have this color and that unit shall have that color, but something to establish that the units that will get built one by one through here are going to be consistent with the renderings that were presented to this planning commission through the approval process.
You'd like that added to the development agreement?
If it could be an exhibit in the development agreement.
Okay. Next up on page 19.
In addition to an exhibit to the development agreement, I think it could be some verbiage could be added to the development agreement under the developer's obligations that we shall build units consistent with the exhibit F or whatever it is.
Okay. So next up, page 19. Discrepancy in the quantities of the 8 versus the 10-inch blue spruce trees between the plan and the table on L1. The plan does not show any proposed grading along the south property line nor the placement of the trees. We do not believe the grading plan has been changed. Dave?
So when this plan came before the Planning Commission for their preliminary approval in, I believe, July, the direction of the Planning Commission was to A, provide some variation in the grading, and B, provide some variation in the height of the trees proposed along the south property line. What the Planning Commission saw in the preliminary plan was a row of 8-foot trees that are staggered and placed in kind of what's meant to be a natural placement. But the Planning Commission directed the applicant to vary the grading along that south property line and also vary the heights of the trees so that the 8-foot trees would be planted at different heights along the way, and then they'd be interspersed with some 10 or even some 12-foot trees. What's being proposed is, I believe, 6 of the trees that had been shown as 8-footers are now 10-footers, although there is a discrepancy between how it's shown on the plan and what's quantified in the table. And unless I did not see it with the elevation lines, I didn't see changes in the proposed grading elevations. So I'm hoping perhaps the applicant or his engineer can give us some insight on that.
Yes, I'd love to address that. First of all, there is a discrepancy between the plan and the chart. We did sprinkle 8 10-foot trees along that south property line, which I believe is what the Planning Commission had asked for at the last meeting, which is a little more than a third of those trees along that south side. The plan that you have before you does not show the undulation in that area. It's not at a scale, and we don't have the actual pond designed. We are, however, working on the construction plans to finalize that, and that will show a variation in the slopes along there. The level of detail just at this stage, does not show that, but that is certainly in our intent, and Mr. Campbell will see that when those construction plans come through.
So if I could ask a question.
Absolutely.
What did we determine?
Yeah, 8 of the 22 trees on the south property line are 10-footers. 8
of the 22 are 10-footers, yes. Meaning 14 of the 22 are 8-footers, with some variation, with some undulation in the grade.
Yep.
So if the planning commission were comfortable with it, they could make it a condition of approval that the landscape plan that comes back for stamping by my office, if the planning commission so chooses to give some administrative authority to me to look for some variation in the grading along that south property line, and also to ensure that there are 8 trees, 10-footers. If 8 10-footers is the right number, then we would verify that on the resubmitted landscape plans that come back to me for stamping.
Okay. I imagine that they'll be comfortable with that. I'm just looking at some heads.
Yep.
Okay. Let's see here. Page 21. Attorney's review. Dave.
Yes, so the attorney provided a red line copy of the development agreement, the master deed, and the bylaws, and those, I hope, were provided to the applicant, and what the recommendation of staff is that the applicant revise those 3 legal documents per the recommendations of both the township attorney and the planning department. I know there was a lot of redundancy in what we caught and what our township attorney caught, and I don't necessarily expect this planning commission to be able to, chime in with a whole lot of legal interpretation. So the recommendation would be that the applicant revise those legal documents per the recommendations of both staff and of the attorney.
Okay. You guys okay with what's gone back and forth? Okay. That concludes what was called out in the review letter itself that we needed to discuss this evening. Were there any other questions or comments? Any discussion the Planning Commission, the Planning Director, the applicant wanted to have? Anything else?
I'll mention that we are in discussions, early discussions with the Autumn Woods Homeowners Association, because we do need to acquire, per the terms of this development agreement, the applicant is proposing that it's the township's obligation to seek a public utility easement through the common area of Autumn Woods so that we can get this water main extension down into Autumn Woods and connect with the existing valve that they have on their property and create that loop, which is what the applicant is proposing as his recognizable benefit for this planned development. So the township is doing their part of meeting the terms of this proposed development agreement by seeking that utility easement.
Okay. Comments on that or anything else, anyone? If not, and you're so inclined, there is a motion on page 23 of the review letter.
I move to forward the site plan application 524-F, final plan development site for Fiddler Grove, to the Hartland Township Board with a recommendation of conditional approval subject to the following. The applicants satisfy the conditions of approval recommended by the DPW Director, Township Attorney, and Fire Marshal on the forthcoming construction plans and/or stamping sets. And the applicant revised the development agreement, condominium master deeds, and condominium bylaws to address the comments of the Planning Department, Township Attorney, Planning Commission, and the Township Board. And any items that were covered tonight in the review letter dated 9/3/2015.
Support.
Jim?
Okay, we have a motion to move site plan application 524 to the board from Commissioner Voigt, a second from Commissioner Newsom. Is there any discussion? Are we covered well enough on that third point, Dave?
And what that third point is meant to convey is the sidewalk discussion, the landscaping discussion, and the building elevation details as an exhibit to the development agreement.
You comfortable with all that?
Yes.
Inclusive? Any other questions, discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Congratulations and thank you. right, we'll move to item 9, call of the public. Anything else? None? Okay. Item 10, planners report.
Just an update on some pending projects. So, Mayberry Homes, who acquired what the township affectionately referred to as the sewer properties on both the north and south side of M59, west of Fenton/Pleasant Valley Road. The Mayberry Homes concept plan was submitted yesterday, or I think it was yesterday, and they are showing a mix of apartments and detached condominiums and future commercial phases that would have to come back at a later date once they have a better sense of what those are. So that concept plan, they are submitting as a plan development, as we would expect on a mixed-use project such as what they want to do. And that concept plan may be in front of this Planning Commission at our next meeting on September 24th if everything falls into place. Also what should be on that September 24th agenda is the revised preliminary plan development for Walnut Ridge Estates. So this is the 64 and maybe 65 houses behind Venture Church. We did make a good effort to try to get in front of the Planning Commission this evening, but there was a lot of loose ends, and that's a big enough project with a lot of things going on that affect the area around it that we didn't want to rush that. So that should be ready for September 24th. And the Township Board will be seeing the Turn-Into softball complex that this Planning Commission saw at our last meeting. They'll be seeing that this coming Tuesday, September 25th, for their special land use approval. And on September 1st, the Township Board approved the special land use for Speedway. So that one is through the approval process, and now we move on to construction with them and have a lot more conversations with them about bricks. So that I can't remember if I mentioned this to this Planning Commission. I know that their hope is to leave the store and the gas standing this winter, but get going on moving the driveway and replacing the mobile pad with the additional parking for Fountain Square. They want to get kind of the off-site stuff done to the extent that they can, and weather permitting this year and through the winter. And their hope is once they get into the spring is when they would knock down the old store and probably as quick as they can put up a new store.
Yeah, I think they said 3 to 4 months on a closure.
I can't imagine they want a delay.
No, there'll be a lot of grumpy people. They're going to have to go someplace else for their coffee. All right. Okay. Some do. All right. Anything else, Dave?
I think Tom Brady's playing right now. So.
All right. Okay. Should we go into closed session then? All righty. Committee reports, anyone? Adjournment, please.
So moved.
Support. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you.